From the year 1940 to the year 1945, Auschwitz was a concentration camp that spread fear over the Jewish community. This camp was located in Poland and was the largest and most complex of its kind. It was established by the Nazi regime and included three main camps: Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II, and Auschwitz III. In 1933, under Adolf Hitler's orders, the Nazis began rounding up the Jewish people for their concentration camps. In 1940, Auschwitz had approximately 10,000 prisoners in their concentration camp, and by 1945, that number had grown to approximately 960,000 prisoners. The Jewish prisoners were required to do a great amount of hard labor every day. They had to endure harsh punishments and brutal beatings, and women and children were no exception to this. Life in this camp was anything but good. They lived in filth. Vermin were everywhere. Many people became sick and died from the illness they received from these unstable living conditions. Life here was not easy. They had to endure physical pain, mental pain, and try to live on to the next day, not knowing where their family, friends, or any other close members were. Day by day, life only seemed to have gotten worse in the camp of Auschwitz. It seemed as if there was no hope of getting out of this miserable place. In 1944, the Nazis began deporting large numbers of Jewish people from Auschwitz to other camps, for they had heard that the Soviet forces were beginning their invasion. On January 27, 1945, the Soviet Union had finally broken past the Nazi army and had successfully invaded Auschwitz. Finally, the Jewish people were freed from torture, freed from separation. They were now able to go back to their homes. After being liberated, they thought they could go back to their regular lives, return to their homes and family, but they soon realized that all of that was gone. They realized they had only woken up from one nightmare to simply fall back into another. When the Jewish people had returned to their societies, they soon realized that they were not welcomed there. There was still a major barrier between the Jewish people and the rest of society. They had to put everything back together piece by piece to try and rebuild their lives once again. Almost all of the Jews had no home to return to. They either returned to ash, knocked down wood. They had nothing anymore. Everything had been destroyed. No clothes, no materials, no money. They had no friends, no family. Everyone and everything they once had is gone. What was supposed to be freedom was not freedom at all. It was as if they were still locked up and were never freed to begin with. Years after the liberation of Auschwitz, many Jews still remained in hiding for fear of the prejudiced ways that still remained with the rest of society. A sigh of relief came to the Jewish people when in 1946 the executions and trials for the senior Nazis began. In 1947, the first commander of the Auschwitz concentration camp was put to trial. His name was Rudolf Höss, and he was executed on April 16, 1947, only 2 years after the liberation of Auschwitz. He died proudly, along with the reign of the Nazi Party. Among the senior Nazis was Arthur Liebehenschel. He was the second commander at the concentration camp of Auschwitz, and he was executed on January 28, 1948. He was different than Höss because he was much more kind and caring towards the Jewish people. However, he still was executed for the war crimes he had committed. Even after 3 years passing from the liberation of Auschwitz and the many executions of the Nazi leaders that had once tormented the Jewish people, the Jews still did not feel safe to come out in the open. They were still segregated in society, and people still did not accept them. Many Jewish people could no longer tolerate the segregation that was continuing in their society. Many immigrated to the United States where they could experience equality once again and no longer have to deal with the segregation that was occurring in their own society. They knew it was not fair and they knew it was unjust, but never did they resort to the violent ways of the Nazis. People do not realize that the liberation of Auschwitz wasn't really a liberation at all, at least not till many years later. People do not see how hard the lives of the Jewish people were even after they were free, because they were not free. They still had to endure the mental pain, the physical pain. They still were taunted and segregated from the rest of society. Life was never easy for them, and it wasn't getting any better, looking any soon. Fortunately, today, in the 21st century, that segregation no longer exists. The hard lives of the Jewish people is no more. They now live as equals. There are very few people left in the Nazi Party that share that same hatred they once did back then. Finally, after many years, the Jewish people were successfully able to piece their lives back together again.